Hi there. Today we're looking at Discriminating Systems, Gender, Race and Power in AI by Sarah Myers-West, Meredith Whittaker and Kate Crawford of the AI Now Institute, which is a part of New York University or associated with it. This is not as much a paper as it is a report kind of summarizing current literature and also kind of an opinion piece slash recommendation giving document. Yes, so we'll dive into it. As you can see from the index, it's quite a long report, and we don't have time to go into all of it. Actually, we don't have time to go into most of it. I just hope to kind of point out what the main arguments and themes are in the report, kind of what it's trying to say, pick out some interesting things, and summarize it to the best of my ability. Also give a little critique. So let me actually go ahead and try to state the kind of core argument that the report is trying to make, because it's not really clear from reading it, and you have to kind of read the whole thing, and then it kind of becomes clear what the argument is, I feel, though they somehow state it in the introduction numerous times in various ways. So I might just be not as attentive a reader at first time. But all right, so here's the argument, and I really hope I'm representing this correctly. We have a problem currently that sometimes AI systems can exhibit what we usually call bias, and we don't mean mathematical bias like bias variance trade-off. We mean bias in a societal sense, let's say bias against certain types of people where they shouldn't exist. So, for example, let me draw an AI system, and I'll just draw a little computer screen with a little light bulb. All right. So this is, because it's smart, this is an AI system, and the AI system, and they give numerous examples. One example they give is like a face recognition algorithm that is much more accurate on faces of white males as opposed to darker skinned females. So let me draw like two curves to represent these distributions are unequal, and so the AI system exhibits some bias with respect to some kinds of people with, and especially protected attributes. And in this report they focus mainly on gender and race, so that's what we're going to talk about. The second thing they observe, so this is observation one. The second thing they observe is, I'm going to draw some generic people here that represent the workforce of AI. So the AI workforce is classified as all the people that work on AI, be that university researchers or within companies building AI products or deploying them. So this is the workforce. And they observe that there is a unequal distribution among the AI workforce. So this distribution, I'm also going to do this for unequal distribution. There's an unequal distribution in the AI workforce. Most notably, it's predominantly males who work on AI, and also white people are overrepresented compared to the world population at large. So that's kind of the two observations they make. And now what they claim is that the inequality or the unequal representation in the workforce is causing the bias in the AI systems. So they're basically saying these AI systems are biased because that the workforce is unequally distributed. And also they claim in a less powerful sense, I feel, but they claim there is a loop, that this then leads back that because there is bias in the AI system, that again leads to an more unequal distribution of the workforce. So the core argument really is, as they set out to do, like in the introduction, and also claim that they have done in the conclusion, is to demonstrate these two directions here in a causal way. So the systems are biased because there is an unequal representation in the workforce, and that feeds back. So the argument is that if you want to fix the bias here, if you want to fix that, then you will have to fix it via making the workforce more what they call diverse, so less unilaterally distributed towards white males. That's kind of the final conclusion. If you read the report and the recommendations, that's mainly what they're going for. So my opinion, or in my opinion, having read the report a couple of times, is that as I see it, they really don't demonstrate these links. So they give examples of this, and they give examples of this, right? They show that the workforce is unequally distributed. They show that AI systems can exhibit such bias, but they never actually show these links, in my opinion. They don't show this. So if you make the claim that in order to fix the bias in AI systems, you must fix the unequal representation in the workforce, I would need a argument that says, because there is unequal representation, therefore A, therefore B, therefore C, therefore bias, like an actual argument to follow that says because of this, that, because of that, and so on. Like, it's just not there. Like, they simply show parallels. They simply show that these two things exist, and they just list example after example of that. And I don't think they make this argument. What I think to also the other direction, they don't really make this argument, except in one case where, if you give them benefit of the doubt. What I think is that it appears like the article, if you read it, and I encourage you to read it if you have some time, it makes a lot of sense if you have already accepted this conclusion. Like, if you've already accepted this, then it's like, oh yeah, because I feel this is just a text where the confirmation bias is so high, just the way it's written, that it must make a lot of sense to someone who's already kind of in on this conclusion. But to someone who isn't sold yet, like myself, I am just not finding this convincing at all. The second thing is that it very much feels like this isn't like a discovery or something, but someone actually set out with the goal to address this here, with the goal of, I want companies to hire more of these people, or of certain kinds of people, or to become more diverse, or to promote more of a certain type of people. And now I'm going to find reasons for this, and the reason is like, oh, look at this bias here. This is caused by this other thing, and therefore we must fix this other thing. It very much feels like someone setting out with already the conclusion in mind, rather than this being an honest investigation. But yeah, I mean, read it for yourself. I can't prove the absence of an argument by not reading every single line, and I can't read every single line because it'll just get very long and boring. But read it yourself, and I think I'm pretty. I've read it numerous times with really an open mind to be convinced that there is an argument in there, but I don't think there is. Or I don't think there is a very strong argument for this. All right. This first part here is more or less a summary. So research findings is more or less a summary, and we'll get to these things as they are important. Then they state recommendations right at the beginning. So actually you'd have to read the article first. This is kind of more of an abstract section, but since it's right here, we'll kind of jump right into it. So these are recommendations, and I've claimed they don't really show a connection, but they actually just show examples of this and examples of this and parallel them. And this is reflected in like every single section, including here in the recommendations. They have recommendations for improving workplace diversity, and they have recommendations for addressing bias and discrimination in AI systems, right? So, all right. In my case, if you make this argument, I would feel you'd also make recommendations for breaking these links. But or argue why they can't be broken. But all right, let's jump into some of them, and it's really a mixed bag here, really. So some recommendations I'm really in favor of, just from the go. You don't even need the article for those. Here, publish harassment and discrimination transparency reports, including number of claims over time, the types of claims submitted, and actions taken. So it's known that, especially in these larger companies, sexual harassment claims often go down in either bureaucracy or are kind of hushed under the table or something like this. What you have to recognize is that a human resource department of a large company isn't there to serve the human resources. It's there to serve the company providing human resources. That's why a sexual harassment claim to an HR department is just a potential lawsuit, and that's why they don't want to take it seriously, except for it must go away really quickly. So I think to kind of force companies or to ask companies to be more transparent, to take more seriously the accusations of sexual harassment and assault and also discrimination is a very valuable goal, and I fully support this. Also, commit to transparency around hiring practices, especially regarding how candidates are leveled, compensated, and promoted. That also is in the larger the company gets, the less transparent this process usually becomes, or the more bureaucratic, the more people are able to game it and so on, and distort it. So I feel it's always good to be transparent around. Okay, this person provides this much value to the company, therefore they should be compensated according to that, or at least be transparent about it. So these are kind of recommendations I like. Then recommendations that really go into a different direction is something like this here: change hiring practices to maximize diversity. And this is kind of I'm not going to go on here. This is reflected in other points. Increase the number of people of color, women, and other underrepresented groups at senior leadership levels of AI companies across all departments. So these things, they are usually within like company diversity goals and so on. Doesn't really say how to do it, but then as such, they're not really recommendations yet. They're more like goals. But here, recommendation 7, I think, is the crucial one. Ensure executive incentive structures are tied to increases in hiring and retention of underrepresented groups. So it's a bit of coded language, but here they talk about executive incentive structure tied to hiring and retention of underrepresented groups. This basically means if you are a manager or someone in charge of hiring or promoting, and you hire or promote a underrepresented person, and since they're talking about gender and race here, that means if you hire or promote a person of color or a woman in this case, you will be compensated more. So at the end of the year, you'll somehow have more money, like more bonuses or more base comp or more equity or something, like you'll get more money. So this recommendation is a direct call to hire based on race and gender. So this is a direct call to racist and sexist hiring, basically, to discriminate people according to their skin color and according to their gender, which I mean, how is this okay with anyone? Like, how are people even able to state this and in like a high profile report like this and get away with it and not have people criticize them? This directly calls for people to be treated according to their gender and race, and probably as directly as you can go without getting into actual legal trouble. But yeah, I'm really against such practices. I mean, yeah, I just don't know how this can ever be thought of as a good thing by anyone. All right, so, well, yeah, in my mind, this recommendation and this recommendation kind of are counter to each other, because if I commit to transparency, how people are okay, now I can transparently commit to be racist, I guess. But if I say, okay, I'm going to comp and promote people based on how much value they provide to the company, then yeah, I'd much rather have that than saying I'm going to comp and promote people based on their skin color. All right, so let's actually jump into the report. I'm not going to, these recommendations for addressing bias and discrimination in systems, these are fairly general and common. So as I said, we'll jump most of the things in the report. So introduction. So they start out with, there is a diversity crisis in the AI industry. They give like some numbers, like 15% of AI research staff and 10% at Google, so 15% of Facebook are women. So these are some kind of fairly known statistics about how the AI field is kind of gender and race skewed currently. So they claim in bold, the diversity problem is not just about women, it's about gender, race, and most fundamentally about power. It affects how AI companies work, what products get built, who they're designed to serve, and who benefits from their development. So I find this word power and this notion of power a lot in this report. It appears again and again and again in like power dynamics and power dynamics among groups. It's like a world view. It paints like a world view where these different gender and race groups kind of struggle against each other to gain power over another, and whoever's in power will try to remain in power in alliance with their gender and race group and try to keep the other groups down. I'm not sure that's the correct view of the world. In my mind, the world is comprised of individual people that want to achieve something for themselves, and they would like to prop themselves up. Whereas in this worldview, it's like, I'm going to use the power of my group to keep the other groups down. I don't know which worldview you subscribe to, but I find the world is comprised of individuals. And this is not discrediting that some people have it harder because of their gender or race. But to see the entire world as a power struggle between these groups, to me, it's and I'm not going to point out everywhere it appears, this power wording, but it appears a lot, and it's really shapes how the report reads. You have to kind of remember, if you're a white male, and currently the field is comprised of 90% white males, if you have like 10 hours, let's say you have 10 hours to do something, right? You can either choose to put down some other groups, like put down groups that you're not part of, or you can choose to invest these 10 hours in putting up yourself, right? So if I'm a white male, I profit minimally from keeping the other groups down, because guess what? I still have to compete with the 1 billion other white males there are. That's not going to help me to keep down anyone else, and especially it's moronic. Who does that? Who has alliance, except most fringe people, to their race or gender rather than to the people they admire and respect and like to work with. So I'm gonna, if I have 10 hours today, I'm gonna rather spend this in propping up myself compared to everyone else, and I don't care what gender or race they are. And so that, to me, that's a much more accurate, or plausible worldview. But just be aware that this report really takes on the language of kind of groups and power between groups, and groups trying to, kind of gain power and keep power and keep others from having power. All right, so they say, to date, the diversity problems of the AI industry and the issues of bias in the systems it builds have tended to be considered separately. We suggest that these are two versions of the same problem. issues of discrimination in the workforce and in system buildings are deeply intertwined. And moreover, tackling the challenges of bias within technical systems requires addressing workforce diversity and vice versa. So I think this here actually is like how I described the argument, and they kind of restated multiple times in a bit different way, but I think this is the core, and I really think I'm not misrepresenting the article here in that this is what they are setting out to do. They're setting out to say, okay, the diversity, the kind of unequal representation in the workforce and the bias in some AI systems are causally linked to each other, and tackling one requires tackling the other. So yeah, if I'm misrepresenting them, let me know, but I really think I'm accurately representing their argument. So what they do, as I said, is they give examples of one and of the other, and also they're really on kind of discrediting the kind of issues to solve problems of bias in a different way. So they point a little bit to this here in the introduction. They say, in the face of growing evidence, the AI research community and the industry producing AI products have begun addressing the problem of bias by building on a body of work of fairness, accountability, and transparency. So fairness, accountability, and transparency research concerns these issues. For one, is research showing that some products are unfair or untransparent and so on. And on the other hand, it's trying to devise algorithms that are more fair, according to some notions, or more accountable and transparent, which means that the algorithm can kind of say why it made a certain decision, rather than it being a deep learning system that you don't really have an insight. These fields are active fields of research, definitely very interesting to look into. But they kind of, it is not already here, but they say, yeah, we have adjusting AI systems that produce a result deemed fair by one of various mathematical definitions. You can already see in the language here, they don't really like this research, and they are trying in this report to kind of discredit it, or at least claim that it doesn't solve the whole problem, because their point is, of course, you have to address this diversity issue in the workforce in order to fix the problems. Yeah. So to this, I just want to say, no. Like, if you can criticize the fairness and accountability and transparency research field in that they haven't solved the problem fully yet. But in principle, if I have an algorithm, if I'm being delivered an algorithm, right, and the fairness literature has been applied to that algorithm, and someone tells me, I guarantee you, here is a proof, the algorithm is fair, right, then I really don't care who made that algorithm. As long as it's fair, the problem is fixed. If the bias is gone, the problem is fixed. And I don't care who fixed it. I don't care if the person who fixed it is black or white or purple. Then the problem is fixed. And they really have to, they really try to just make the counter argument here is that no, it's not enough. But I claim, yes, if you can actually solve the fairness problem technically, then you have solved the fairness problem. Yeah, the only thing you can do is claim that it is not good enough yet, but not that it's they kind of have to make the argument that it's fundamentally flawed approach, and I don't think they succeed in doing that here. Yeah, so they go on to say, we should expand to consider not only how AI tools can be biased technically, but how they're shaped by the environments in which they're built in and the people that build them. Again, this focus, like who builds the AI system, I don't care. I care what it does, right? As much as if I hear an argument for or against something, I don't care who makes the argument, right? I care what the argument says. It's like an ad hominem attack for an entire community. That's kind of how this article, this report, shows, or it appears to me. So they say, currently, Large-scale AI systems are developed almost exclusively in a handful of technology companies and a small set of elite university laboratories, spaces that in the West tend to be extremely white, affluent, technically oriented, and male. So yeah, their problem, that's their fundamental problem here, that these spaces are skewed in one direction. Interestingly enough, their problem is not so much that they're all in the same place, right? That they all live like 20 miles from each other around San Francisco. That seems to be not a problem at all, as long as we get like enough people of color and women into these 20 miles. But yeah, so that's pointing out the problem here, or the kind of issue they have. All right, so they go on. Just kind of want to highlight again, they say both within the spaces where AI is being created and the logic of how AI systems are being designed, so paralleling the two things, the cost of bias, harassment, and discrimination are borne by the same people. Gender minorities, people of color, other underrepresented groups. Then they also say similarly, the benefits of such systems, from profit to efficiency, accrue primarily to those who are already in positions of power, tend to be white, educated, and male. So they say this points to a systematic relationship between patterns of exclusion within the field of AI and the industry driving its production on the one hand, and the biases that manifest in the logics and applications of AI technologies on the other. And they try to make this connection because they say the cost and the benefit of these two things are overlap in the people that where it costs and it benefits. And I really, again, it's just a parallel, but I really even don't think that's true, because they kind of argue against themselves later. So they always say we have to look at, again, they shoot against take much more than the technically driven problem solving. They point to this, so our research requires looking at gender and race as categories within which humans think. Blah, blah, blah. In short, studies of discriminatory systems, we need to ask who is harmed, who benefits, who gets to decide. So it's kind of who bears the cost, who bears the benefits, and who has the power. So that's, and again, we seek to understand how AI disadvantages some. We also consider how it works to the advantage of others. So keep that in mind. That's kind of the lens through how they analyze this thing. Again, one that acknowledges power relationships and centers equity and justice. That's they want to see this bigger picture. So that's keep that in mind. So they go into a section called "Which Humans Are in the Loop? How Workforces and AI Systems Interact." So this kind of, from the title of this section, you think, okay, here's where we get in, here's where we make the argument. And they start by listing examples of how AI systems can be discriminatory. And first, they go into an example of Amazon had developed an experimental hiring tool to help rank job candidates. By learning from its past preferences, Amazon hoped that the resume scanning tool would be able to efficiently identify qualified applicants, comparing their applications to previous hires. The system quickly began to downgrade resumes from candidates who attended all women's colleges, along with any resumes that included the word women's. After uncovering this bias, Amazon engineers tried to fix the problem by directing the system to treat these terms in a neutral manner. The company eventually abandoned the tool when they were unable to ensure that the algorithm would not be biased against women. Gender-based discrimination was built too deeply within the system and in Amazon's past hiring practices to be uprooted using a purely technical approach. So this, just the way it's written, I find to be I find to be quite dishonest. But let's analyze what happened here. So their final claim is that gender-based discrimination was built too deeply within the system to be uprooted using a purely technical approach. So this is one of their arguments. They say technical approaches, they don't help because the Amazon engineers tried to fix the problem, right? But when they were unable to ensure that the algorithm would not be biased against women. So if you read this, I really get the impression that's not what happened here. What happened here most probably is Amazon built this tool, okay, and it fed in its past hires, and we know of issues of like dataset bias inherent in datasets. So if your dataset is skewed, the AI tends to pick up on the skewed dataset and becomes skewed itself. Okay, so I actually would argue that most or all of the examples they state in here are examples of such biased datasets, and not so the cause of the bias is the dataset that the AI is trained on, and not the person that ran the code or built the algorithm to train it on or built the deployment. And so, but it doesn't matter. You're Amazon. You built this tool, and you realize, it discriminates against people having women's on their CV. So this is a pretty bad PR-wise. So you tell your engineers, fix the problem. So the engineers go fix the problem. They come back and say, okay, we fixed the problem. And then what you do is you say, okay, engineers, can you ensure me that the algorithm would not be biased against women? Because if only the slightest bias exists, it doesn't even have to be, if one journalist finds one example where there is a downrank because I add the word women's, then we are screwed, right? And the engineers will say, no, we can't guarantee that. It's a deep learning system or something, right? We can't give you a proof that it's not biased. If you're a smart executive at that point, you'll scrap the tool because the potential PR downside are just huge. And probably they've also realized it's not that handy to have this tool compared to their recruiters doing their job, because their recruiters might actually be good and have been doing this for a while. So the fact that this tool was scrapped is probably much more a result of a PR disaster. But also independent of that, to say gender-based discrimination was built too deeply within the system to be uprooted using a purely technical approach. It's just, what is this? This is just trying to discredit this kind of technical going about solving this problem. But I'm pretty sure if someone comes to me and says, here, I have this tool and I can mathematically prove to you that it's not biased, then then the problem is solved. And also, I really don't see how the person training the algorithm or the person researching such an algorithm has any influence over how the algorithm works, because they're not the ones making the data set. Or if they are, then they can make a better data set. Also, if a person comes and makes a better data set, that will fix the problem. And it doesn't matter what skin color the person has that makes the better data set. So all of this link is just not demonstrated here or anywhere here at all. But this here is the closest Amazon that this report actually comes to making this point. So before, I drew this thing, workforce AI bias, right? So this link, since here the AI system is used for hiring the workforce. So at least one could make a claim that this link is somewhat demonstrated. But it's a weak case, I would agree, but this is the closest they come. But then to go this direction, you have to somehow argue, well, the workforce somehow makes the AI system biased. No, the workforce influences the data set. if the AI is trained, so if a hiring AI, how do you train a hiring AI? You optimally train it on the performance. So this employee here is going to have a performance over time, right? And the AI system will look at that performance over time. So if the AI system, even if it's initially biased because it learns from the recruiters, it will learn that, okay, actually, if I always forego these women, then I don't get as much performant of a workforce. So I should correct for that. So if you train the AI system on a good metric, then this problem will even out itself. So, but again, this could be considered like one point in the argument, but I think it's a very weak point, and only because the AI system is actually used for hiring. Where I think the point they're making is a much larger one, is the general bias in the AI systems contributes to the workforce imbalances. And there you somehow have to say that, okay, the AI system somehow influences society at large, and society at large then leads to the workforce being skewed. It's just not strong enough, in my opinion. And the other direction also isn't strong here. But again, the examples only get weaker from here on. They go on, they say, this is just one of many examples that show how the functional logics of a given technology echo the gender and racial dynamics of the industry that produced it. Here, that's the claim they're making. They echo the gender and racial dynamics, and they're actually making a stronger claim, namely a causal claim. They give the other example of the Amazon's recognition facial analysis service previously demonstrated gender and racial biases, worse than those of comparable tools. So it failed to see dark-skinned women while being most proficient at detecting light-skinned men. And they later go into this example again, where they basically also state, yes, this is an issue of the data set. The data set being much more comprised of white men. And they say, but then you have to kind of make the turnaround argument and say, well, the data set is a reflection of society, and society, part of society is the workforce, and it's just not, again, this argument only works if you already believe the conclusion. Otherwise, there's actually no argument there, or no solid one. But what they do here is they say Amazon's initial response to such criticism has been to try and discredit the research behind it. This reaction, or let's first discuss this. So the Amazon, of course, being the accused here and a multi-billion-dollar company, and the criticism is something that is PR-wise very bad for them. They discredit the research, try to discredit the research behind it. It's understandable that this could be dishonest from Amazon's side, right? They're getting attacked. It's like the tobacco companies trying to discredit the smoking research. But still, that doesn't mean it's wrong. It could actually be bad research, right? So you have to actually go and look at what's Amazon saying. What is the research really doing? Is Amazon right or wrong? I'm completely open that Amazon is wrong here, but you still have to go look. And this citation here, I've tried. This citation here, this one, isn't to Amazon's response. It's to like a Medium article, and the Medium article doesn't even include Amazon's response. I've looked, maybe I haven't seen it. It doesn't link Amazon's response. Maybe it links something or that includes it in some way, but basically this Medium article only states, Amazon has been denying this, or Amazon has been critical of this. And if you state such a sentence, Amazon's initial response to such criticism has been to try and discredit the research behind it, I at least expect the citation to lead me to Amazon's response so that I can verify what they're saying, right? So this, I don't know. I'm willing to chalk it up to, incompetence rather than malice. Right, but then they go on and they say this reaction is evidence of the wider problem. The research was conducted by two well-regarded AI researchers who are women of color. By attempting to publicly discredit their expertise and research methods, Amazon is reinforcing the same kinds of prejudice and erasure that the research critiques. Yeah, here, you go straight to the identity of the researchers. You, like, play the race card straight out. I mean, this is maximum dishonesty, right? Except if Amazon said something like, well, these women of color, clearly because they're women of color, they have no idea what they're doing, or something like this. This is basically, it's coded language for saying, either saying you're not allowed to criticize people of color because they're a minority, or you're basically saying Amazon is racist and that's why they criticize them. They just don't take them seriously because they're women of color. I mean, both are abhorrent. This is just dishonesty really stated here too. I mean, again, I'm perfectly willing to accept that Amazon's critique of this research is wrong and is not well intended because they're the ones attacked, but you still have to examine it rather than say, well, they shoot against women of color and therefore somehow that makes their counter argument irrelevant or even racist or something. That's, I don't know. I find this dishonest. Yeah. I don't know about you. Going on. So they go on and state a number of examples of bias and discrimination in the workforce, and they a lot of time they make a mixture of the gender and race imbalance in a workforce, and things like sexual harassment not being taken seriously by the companies, and also the things like gender or race pay gaps, which I'm open to accept that these things exist and are even intertwined. But just to tell you what's happening, because we're kind of skipping, but it's kind of a mixture of these things. So they say these issues are systemic. There's a close relationship between these workplaces with discriminatory practices and discriminatory tools. A feedback loop that is shaping the AI industry and its tools. So again, here to state, I think I've stated it enough now or demonstrated enough that I'm really representing their arguments as they intended it to, namely that there is this kind of causal links and loop between these two things. Again, they shoot against the fairness literature by saying, from this perspective, locating individual biases within given technical systems and attempting to fix them by tweaking the system becomes an exercise in futility. Only by examining discrimination through the lens of social logics, who it benefits, who it harms, and how, can we see the workings of these systems in the context of existing power relationships. Again, they say these issues aren't technically fixing these systems won't help if that's the problem. And yeah, I agree. If that causal link actually exists, then technically fixing the system might not solve the problem. Not even sure. I mean, if you technically fix a system like this, then you technically break the causal link and thereby fix the problem. I would. Oh, sure, but again, this is based on the hypothesis that they've already reached, like demonstrated their conclusion, which they haven't and which they are not in the entire article. So the next section goes into who makes AI. So I don't know about you, but this section was titled How Workforces and AI Systems Interact, and apart from the AI system being used for hiring the workforce, which is, I said, it's one instance where actually there could be one causal direction from bias to misrepresentation in the workforce. Other than that, there isn't really anything in there that really shows how these two interact, especially in a causal way. All right, the next section is called Who Makes AI, and it's broadly about the gender and race imbalances or not unequal representation in the workforce. And we're going to skip this diversity statistics that discuss that diversity statistics of companies aren't really accurate, or can be massaged kind of by the companies, which is true. Definitely companies will always try to maximize their profits, and even if they give out such a report, so that definitely critical thinking is in order. All right, so the next section is called the discrimination feedback loop. Right, if in the earlier section you felt like here we go into the meat, then you must feel with this title like, okay, we're actually going to see how this loop works and how the two things are really linked, like how one causes the other and vice versa. So let's jump in. They say AI systems increasingly play a role in our social and political institutions, including education, healthcare, hiring, criminal justice. Yes, therefore, we need to consider the relationship between the workplace diversity crisis and the problems with bias and discrimination in AI systems. No. Why? I don't see how therefore. But, yeah. So I don't see how therefore we need to consider the relationship. Okay, if there's a relationship, we need to consider whether there's a relationship. Okay, granted. So they say fairness, accountability, and transparency research is playing an emerging role. And what they mean here is the aspect of fairness, accountability, and transparency research that shows that there is a problem. So I told you there's two sides. One side is showing there is a problem in current systems, and the other side is trying to fix them. So they're very much fans of the side that shows that there is a problem, and they show some of these problems here. We've already seen some, but they show some more, like Facebook's ad delivery systems let users to be shown ads for housing and employment in a discriminatory manner. So giving 2019 study found significant racial bias in a widely used commercial algorithm used to determine whether patients will be enrolled in care management programs. So these are just examples of these AI systems being biased. And they go into this, say, taking a contextualized view may enable a more extensive account. And the contextualized view, when they say this, they mean anything more than just a technical approach at solving these problems. A more extensive account of bias to emerge. Future work could examine the politics of system design, study AI systems in situated realities, ask why a system was designed in a particular way, how it was constructed, whose interest it shaped by the metrics in which its success or failure is assessed, rather than solely focusing on improving existing datasets or individual algorithms. Yeah, I agree. I mean, we always have to pay attention to these things, especially like looking at the metrics by which its success or failure is assessed. But a lot of times this is rather straightforward in kind of, if you look at the metric, and the metric most often, especially in commercial applications, is money, right? So the metric of like an ad showing system, like if I have a system to recommend ads to people, show people ads and personalize them and so on, I simply want to maximize my revenue. So I want to sell someone something, and everything I want to know is how likely is it that person is going to buy that thing, right? That's basically, yeah. So in essence, sometimes it's really valuable to consider what capitalism is. So in capitalism, this kind of the system we're working on is kind of a form of limited capitalism, but mostly capitalism. And capitalism is very greedy. So capitalism, all corporations want to do basically is make money. And on the other side, you have discrimination. So discrimination, meaning these unequal distribution actively. So, and sometimes these go hand in hand. Sometimes you can make more money by discriminating against a certain type of people, and that's a really bad scenario. Like, that's a very, like, this is really something where we need to take action. But a lot of times, these two things stand in opposition to each other. So a little arrow here, non-compatible. That means if I want to sell someone something, then I maximize my profit by not caring, by accurately assessing how likely is it that person buys that thing. If I want to discriminate here, if I want to start discriminating according to skin color, saying like, no, I don't like that this person with this skin color is able to buy this product. I want to kind of keep them down and so on. Then I forego profit, right? Then I actually, even though this person could buy this thing, I forego that. So often these things are in direct opposition to each other. Also, if I am in charge of hiring and I don't like people of a certain gender, but they would actually be really, really good, got good employees. So I forgo that. That means I pay more for less qualified people just because I'm biased and I'm down ranking unjustifiably these people of the gender I don't like. So oftentimes you have to ask yourself, are people fundamentally greedy or discriminatory? Which are they more? If push comes to shove, would they rather have more money, or would they rather keep their own race and gender group in power? And with just, yeah, and you have to ask this of corporations, you have to ask this of people, and in my experience and view, like, people are much, much more greedy than they are willing to discriminate and give up money for discrimination. And so if we look at metrics by which success or failure of AI systems are designed, then I would argue a lot of the times metrics are actually profit incentives. And especially if we look at dataset construction, if there is a skewed dataset that makes my AI system be biased, that actually loses me money, and the company would profit a lot from building a better dataset. So looking at kind of metrics actually makes a lot of sense to me, and very much in favor of that. And I think by designing accurate metrics and then getting the best possible information, the best possible datasets to maximize these metrics will oftentimes actually eliminate such forms of discrimination. Again, there are situations where they don't, and we have to be very cognizant of these. They go into this and they say, also examine more thoroughly how societal discrimination surfaces in data provenance, examining the history and process of dataset construction, and considering how cultural norms and stereotypes were enumerated and represented at the time of data creation. This is a big issue, yes. So the dataset construction kind of at the time of data creation and so on, this is a big issue in these systems, and a lot of bias, and I would argue most of the bias we've seen here arises from corrupt datasets and from datasets that were constructed in an already biased way. And the AI system trained on these datasets simply replicates this this bias. So I think that's very correct here. They go into this example. They say the labeled faces in the wild dataset contains over 15,000 images. Only 7% of images are of black people. And this is because the media landscape of the early 2000s, these images were gathered from the news media at the time predominantly featured white men in positions of celebrity and power. This Exactly. So if you train a system on this data set, the system will inherit this bias. Yeah, so this is a classic example of a corrupt data set. Also, I mean, this isn't only with race and gender. This is also if you like take pictures from IMDb, as you know, a lot of this currently celeb A data set that is used in all the GAN research is collected from IMDb. You probably have overly beautiful, like pretty face people on there, like so that your AI system, your generative model, is only going to produce mostly pretty face people, since movie stars tend to be a lot prettier than the average humans. So the kind of data set construction process, I think, is currently the biggest source of bias in AI. But that also, and it's interesting that they go into this here, and they kind of want to make the point that this is because society and, power in society, the data set reflects that. But I would argue, if someone makes a data set that doesn't have this bias, then the problem is solved. And I don't care who makes the data set. So the link between the workforce and the bias is really broken by an argument like this, because as soon as we have a correct data set, an unbiased data set, we can mitigate the bias. And they even go into this here. They say, they say down here, they say these people, these researchers have looked at these facial recognition systems, and they assessed this, what we saw earlier, higher error rates for darker skinned women than for any other group, lowest error rates for light skinned men. To measure this disparity, these researchers developed a new data set that is more balanced both in terms of gender and skin color. Good. Make a larger data set to actually train on, and then problem solved. And I don't care at all what race and what gender these people are. Well done. Good people. Make a good data set like this, and then we've solved the problem. What's the problem here? Why would you ever care what these people look like if they do good work? That's, to me, this actually breaks their own argument. I don't know why they include it here, but yeah. To me, that to then suggest that there's a link to the workforce is if here is obvious that if you fix the data set, you can fix the recognition system. All right, so we'll go on here, jump a couple more paragraphs, except when they say, they shoot again against this, kind of say, to this point, a focus on fixing technical systems in isolation without examining their broader context of use and power and dynamics that attend such use is not limited in its intervention. It can actively cause harm. So if you fix the problem in a technical manner, they argue here it can actively cause harm. And the example they give is that facial and image recognition systems, they are often applied in service of police surveillance, which disproportionately harms poor people and communities of color. So this person, there's a quote from this person that says, "It is not social progress to make black people equally visible to software that will inevitably be further weaponized against us. We are considered criminal and more surveillable by orders of magnitude. Whatever claim to a right of privacy that we may have is diminished by a state that believes we must always be watched and seen." So this is an example where by improving the facial recognition for black people, it makes the police better at surveilling them, which is true. And then, it is an ethical problem that the police is able to use these facial recognition systems to surveil people. That's a massive privacy problem. It's a massive problem in how much the state is allowed to overreach and so on. So I think it's a discussion in itself. But here they argue because at the very beginning I asked you to remember this whole notion of we always have to look at who benefits from the way the AI system is constructed, who is harmed from that, who benefits from how the metrics are shaped, and so on. In this case, we actually have a perfect example where if the face recognition system is very inaccurate for black people's faces, that actually helps them in the societal context. So by logic of this report here, that must mean that somehow the bias, like the bias works for them, and thereby the system is good or something like this, and by fixing it you actually make it worse. Yeah, they say it can actively cause harm. So I think this is a pretty much arguing against themselves earlier, where they say, oh, we always have to look at who benefits from the system. Here, if a face recognition system can't recognize you, you actually benefit. So I don't think that argument works in any case, except if you only look at it when you want to look at it. All right, so this we're going to jump a couple of sections here, but the core thing here was the feedback loop, and again, the feedback loop isn't demonstrated at all here. It's just examples of systems that are biased and of data sets that are biased, or because of data sets that are biased. But there's no demonstration of how the workforce, just take this previous argument. So the workforce is supposedly supremely white, and it makes a face recognition system that is performing poorly for darker skinned people, and that actually in this context of police surveillance helps the darker skinned people compared to the lighter skinned people. So that kind of is an exact counterexample to the argument that this misrepresentation in the workforce leads to the biases in the system. If we interpret it through the lens who it costs and who it benefits. All right. So the next section is corporate diversity beyond the pipeline problem. And this is kind of an odd inclusion when I read it first, to go against the pipeline problem here. But it kind of makes sense if you know what these people set out to do. So what these people set out to do is to argue we must fix the workforce, right? We must hire more people of color, more women, and so on. Promote them more. So they very much have a problem with this pipeline argument. And what the pipeline argument is the following. So at the beginning, if you consider like the educational or career paths of people, at the beginning you have like 100% of people. Let's represent this at the beginning, and then most of these people go through school. So most of these go on. This is kind of the area in here is the population, and then some of them pursue higher education, like some drop out. So this gets a smaller amount go on. So this is here. This is time, and this is kind of volume of people, and then very few go into computer science, right? And then even fewer go into AI. So what you end up is just a tiny sliver of people that actually go into AI. So this is called a pipeline, and we have various junctions here, like where you would go into higher education, where you would choose your major in university, where you would go into a subfield of computer science, where the kind of volume of people drops significantly from one point to the other. And now if you compare this, and you say we'll not consider all of society, but over here we'll consider all just men, and over here we'll consider all women. Again, they all go to high school and then university, and then maybe very few go to CS, even fewer go to AI. What you'll find is, and I've drawn it maybe wrong here, is that this is smaller than this. So if you comparatively look at how many males end up in the AI field, you will find that fewer end up in more and will end up in AI field than women if you comparatively look at it. So and this is over time. Like at the beginning, you have 50-50 main women distribution in society, almost, I guess. I think slightly more boys are born, but I could be wrong about this. And then as you go through time here, this skews, I believe. So you go through high school, and let's just assume like high school is still kind of equal. It depends on the country. Then you go to university, where there's actually more women at university slightly. And then you go into computer science, and in computer science, and this is just relative here, that's why I kind of norm it at 100%, otherwise these things would go down, all of them at the same time. But comparatively, you have then much more men than women in computer science, right? And then if you see who chooses AI, I don't know if there's any statistics of specifically choosing AI from computer science. I'm just going to assume that remains the same. So if you look into the AI field, kind of this will stay the same. So in the AI field, you have much more men than women, and presumably because you already have much more men than women choosing computer science as their major, or choosing any technical field as their major. This is kind of the so-called pipeline argument. So where do AI companies hiring come in? AI companies come in here. They hire at this point after your university degree, presumably. There's exceptions, but we'll just say they hire after your university degree, and therefore they basically have to choose from this distribution. And if they just say, okay, we'll just take the top, 10% people, we'll hire the good people of this, we don't care what gender they are, right? So the top 10% here and the top 10% here, then this will end up being the same distribution as you have graduates, right? So this is kind of the company hiring from let's say an 80-20 distribution without looking at gender will end up with an 80-20 distribution. That's the pipeline argument of companies. And they don't like the pipeline argument because the pipeline argument basically says that the problem is somewhere here, right? The problem isn't the companies hiring wrongly. The problem isn't that the companies here deselect. If the problem is somewhere here, and because they want to make the argument that the companies should hire in a different way, they can't have that. So they argue against it. Now, to argue against this would actually be very easy if this argument were wrong. Like they claim the argument is not good. The pipeline argument isn't good. If the pipeline argument were wrong, what you'd have to do is you would have to say, hey, companies, look at that. In your company, you have an 80-20 distribution men to women, right? That's pretty unequal. And in university graduates, the pool you choose from is actually 50-50. So obviously, you're engaged in discriminatory hiring because, the pool is 50-50. There's no reason why your hiring practices should cause this inequality. And therefore, we can clearly show you do discriminatory hiring. You should stop it. You should definitely hire more women and people of color, more of the minorities, because your hiring practices are the problem. But that's not the case. How do I know? Because if it were the case, they would simply state this. Definitely in this report, if that were the case, that you could actually show with numbers that the pipeline argument is wrong, then they would absolutely do this. Instead, they have to go back and they have to ramble around it for several pages, which we'll mostly skip, but mainly because this is the case. It is the case that these companies hire from a pool of unequally represented people. And the only argument that you can make is that, well, if you were to equalize this here, then maybe here where the problem is, that would fix. Like, so the argument is often made, if young girls choosing their majors have no one to look up to, like no strong women in corporation CEO roles, they will think that it's not a climate for women and they will elect not to go into these fields, which is a valid argument. Like, I'm completely open to that argument, but it's the only argument you can make. And still then, even if you determine this as the cause, I would still not support racist and sexist hiring practices. Like, do something else, like make them clear that the environment can be changed, or change the environment, like change the, if it really is the case that it's kind of a anti-woman environment, change that. If it's just the case that they perceive it as such, change the perception, but do not engage in discriminatory hiring practices, because there's always someone losing out unfairly on these practices, and that's something I'm not willing to go into. Like, that's something I'm not willing to engage in, and I don't think people should be engaging in that. Actually, that's why it's illegal. So let's actually look at very few points. This is just why so they claim, they go over these pipeline studies, and they say, a term used in the industry to reference the absence of diverse candidates in the hiring pool, often to justify the inability of large firms to achieve diversity due to scarcity. Right. So that's, they basically agree on the definition that I stated here. So companies that are challenged on their lack of diversity frequently cite pipeline studies as proof of the persistent challenge of finding enough women and people of color to hire. Yes, but they say, but the evidence suggests otherwise. For example, in 2016's Facebook Chief Diversity Officer wrote that it has become clear that at the most fundamental level, appropriate representation, technology, or any other industry will depend upon more people having the opportunity to gain necessary skills through the public education system. Well, yes, that's something I would agree, and that's something clearly that addresses this region here. Where the actual problem is happening. So I would say that's a very, very good statement from the Facebook's Chief Diversity Officer. They say, but as the Center for Investigative Reporting study of tech company diversity data found, 91 large tech companies headquartered in Silicon Valley managed to hire higher percentages of Black, Latino, and multiracial employees than Facebook that year. Well, just because other companies employ racist and sexist hiring to improve their diversity numbers doesn't mean that Facebook has to do this, right? Like, just because other companies do this doesn't mean that it's a good thing to do, or that's how you should go about it. Facebook simply says, like, if we want to hire without being racist or sexist, if we want to just hire the best people, then more of the best people have to be in the pipeline. Like, more people have to gain access to educational opportunities so we can then hire them. Whereas these other companies probably make a big effort to say, well, even if you are not as educated, even if you're not as qualified as this other person, we'll hire you because of your skin color. I don't think that's an argument in the favor of what the report is claiming. Like, I don't think that is evidence that the pipeline argument is invalid. All right. So they go into core themes in pipeline research, and they do some overview of the kind of pipeline research that sometimes the pipeline research examines why, for example, why women don't choose to go into computer science as much, and sometimes they They focus on what is their perception of the field, what is their perceptions of the stereotypes of the field, what is their perceptions of the kind of culture that in the field, is it suited to them, what is their perception of how qualified they are for the field, and is that true, is that false, and so on. So this research examines a whole variety of things, and it's very interesting actually to read through this research. I want to point out this here. Other studies suggest that gender is correlated with a person's motivations for pursuing a career in the field. Women, and particularly women from low socioeconomic status or minority backgrounds, are more likely to see computing as a versatile profession that provides an opportunity for secure employment, higher pay, and better social standing. Moreover, their interests go beyond technical aspects of computing, focusing instead on the purpose and application of software. However, such interests are often de-emphasized in computer science curricula that prize technical skill and its ability to applicability to industrial settings above all else. So I find this really interesting because it's basically saying that women have different interests than men, and on average, right? That's basically saying that, which is almost heresy. Like, to say this in this context, like, people will come after you if you suggest something like this, and yet they're just stating it here. And remember this for later. This is really funny that they're like, the interests could be different for women than for men, and we might have to adjust our curriculum to be more suited to these different interests. I mean, yeah. I'm sure that's as I said, you're like, usually this is forbidden to say. All right. So they go on. They say limitations of pipeline research. Right. These are fairly like common limitations, let's say, of studies in general, social science studies, which I won't go into much. Again, they state we have to examine. We don't only have to examine this, but the problem, they basically say the problem is actually the culture, and the problem is actually the perpetrators. Where do I say? I don't remember where this is stated, but they again say, like, we have to examine who benefits from its present construction, like who is underserved within the current tech ecology, who benefits from its present construction, how these dynamics might be untangled, and so on. So again, stating that these kind of power relationships for the different groups, which I don't agree is in large part what's happening. They say it's worth considering the scope of these studies, and by and large, the recommendations they issue are limited, targeted at the administrators of university computer science programs, seeking to broaden the diversity of their student body. Yes, that's exactly where we saw the problem appears to be, right? So the reason they have a problem with these studies is that they actually focus on the point where this discrepancy appears to happen. Because they want to claim that no, you should focus on a different point, namely hiring in these companies, hiring and promotion. They say, though important, so at least they acknowledge that that's an important problem. This is a narrow frame through which potential solutions to barriers to inclusion. It does not address the companies that hire computer science students, the peers responsible for promulgating stereotyped views, or engaging in hostile behavior, or the broader social conditions that may influence students' success in computer science programs. Actually, the research, and even some of the examples they've included of this research, addresses all of this. Like the research often addresses the kind of stereotypes and how the peers act, and how the companies act, and also how the companies hire, and how the kind of how people have something to look forward to or nothing to look forward to, and how that influences their decisions. Again, they say the studies are frequently cited by those within corporate environments to justify their own lack of diversity, as they situate the locus of change outside of the corporation itself. As such, pipeline studies are disproportionately emphasized as a part of the broader research agenda on diversity in technology. Again, they state companies use this to get out. And of course, companies, they're going to use this to get out. I mean, I agree at least with that. I agree that companies are going to try to use this to get out of responsibility, certainly. All right, so the last section here is the pipeline dreams after years of research. Again, this is on these pipeline studies. Basically, they say the pipeline research hasn't borne fruit. It hasn't led to meaningful change in the field, even though we've researched this. The reason, they state a number of reasons. They tends to place the onus to solve issues of discrimination, Silicon Valley, on those who are discriminated against rather than the perpetrators. I find this word choice really interesting. Perpetrators, right? Like, again, the group of white men is trying to put down everyone else. That's the perspective that the article takes. And again, and it's not even true. This research, a lot of times it actually says the reason why, for example, women don't choose to go into computer science is the male-dominated culture within these corporations, is the perception of this not being a woman-friendly environment, is the people hear of sexual harassment and so on. So it's not even true, but moreover, I just wanted to point out the choice of word here, perpetrators. I don't know how you get to this word. It really shows kind of a worldview of the authors, in my opinion. All right. So they go on and say, okay, this pipeline studies haven't been beneficial and companies haven't done much, or it hasn't been successful. They go into worker-led initiatives, which I'm going to skip here. It's just a kind of a reporting of what happened at companies where the workers themselves organized. And then the last section here is the pushback against diversity. So in this section, they're kind of documenting and arguing against people who have basically stated counter-arguments to their recommendations mainly. So their recommendations being, let's change the hiring, let's change the promotion, and so on to be based on race and gender. And the pushback here, characterized in different ways. So we'll go through this. This is the last section. I know it's a long video already. If you're still here, like the one person who's still here, hi. I hope you're doing well. Keep hydrated. So they say it's a critical time. We now see diversity itself being weaponized. So they say this growing awareness, accompanied by demands for inclusion and equity, has led to some change, but there has also been resistance, especially among those implicitly privileged by the status quo. So again, jumping straight to attack on the person. Like, I don't care who makes an argument against me. I'm going to go on the argument, and I'm going to go on the content of the argument. But these people first thing they state is that's just by the people who are benefiting. That's just by the white men, basically. Straight to the identity of the person. That's dishonesty right there. So those questioning and even rejecting the idea that racism, misogyny, and harassment are problems within the AI field and the tech industry have appropriated the language of diversity to argue that efforts to improve inclusion are in fact exclusionary, and addressing the deeper structural challenges posed by racism, sexism, inequity is misguided. And yes, definitely efforts to improve inclusion can be exclusionary. Like, just because, so this is the thing, just because you're, let's say, just because you're fixing a problem doesn't mean the method you're using to fixing it is justified and is itself good, right? Methods to improve inclusion can be exclusionary, and some that have been proposed are exclusionary, definitely. It depends on the method. It doesn't mean these people are against these efforts. It means that the measures, for example, implementing racist hiring policy, I can definitely see that this is going to lead to more equal representation within the workforce. But the tool itself is really bad and exclusionary and discriminating. So yeah, I would say that's it's accurate that it can be exclusionary. I say, for example, some AI researchers greeted the announcement of Black in AI workshop at NeurIPS, a leading machine learning conference, by questioning whether the event was necessary, arguing that it would be discriminatory. Well, can't they? Can't they question whether the event was necessary? Like, I would need a discussion. What is it for? Right? Why is this event happening? And what is it doing? And is it discriminatory? Like, it could be. Like, any event can be discriminatory. Does it discriminate based on race or gender or anything? Is it, does it do so unjustly and all? So I don't see why question. It could still be wrong. Like, you could question, and then you could be wrong. But you should be taken on your argument. But the argument here is just already questioning this is already on the wrong side of the argument. And I don't agree with this. Though I don't agree with these people that question this workshop. Don't have a particular opinion on these things, but I have the opinion that you have to take arguments at their argument value and not just at who makes them or whether or not they're against a particular viewpoint. All right, so they say such pushback often centers calls for cognitive diversity or viewpoint diversity. The idea that individual differences in the ways people think and understand the world are distinctions that should be counted alongside or instead of other identity categories such as race and gender. Well, yes, that's I mean, isn't that a very reasonable thing to say? Isn't it very reasonable to say that differences in the ways people think and understand the world, there are distinctions that should be counted alongside other identity categories such as race and gender? They say a dozen white men, so long as they were not raised in the same household and don't think identical thoughts, could be considered diverse. That's I don't know if this is a sarcastic statement or not, but clearly it's kind of the counterpoint they're trying to make here. But yes, I would totally agree with this statement in a way. A white man growing up in San Francisco, a white man growing up in rural Idaho, a white man growing up in Florida, a white man growing up in Western Europe, one in Russia, and one growing up on the road with his circus parents in Mongolia would definitely be plenty diverse, right? They criticize this here, but this is actually how can you not see this, that yes, these are valid differences and people are going to think differently independent of how they look. People are going to have different thoughts, and it's important to recognize other people think differently, and therefore you should include them if it's relevant. And the counter argument to this is, of course, what the authors here are saying basically is that a dozen people, as long as they don't look the same, could be considered diverse, even if they all were raised in the same place and basically all live in San Francisco and think the exact same thing. Yeah, that's, I mean, to me, it sounds as absurd as the other way around. To me, so here's my thoughts on this. I am not going to pretend that I know what life is like as a woman, right? I'm absolutely sure that for areas of life, it is definitely valuable to listen to the experience of a woman or multiple women, an aggregate of women, because the life is just different as a woman. Life is also different as a black person. I absolutely concede that there are things that I might not be able to draw from my life experience because I am not of that skin color, that different problems that people face. And that's why it's important to have an opinion of that at the table. But I'm also absolutely certain that I have no relation to someone who grew up as a child pop star from the age of 12 and then had that life. I have no relation to someone growing up under a communist regime. I have no relation to someone growing up in a kind of a Buddhistic religious tradition. I just don't. And I don't care how they look. They have different experiences. They have different bodies of knowledge to draw on. And I don't think why we should make the difference along the exact lines of race and gender. Yeah, but that's of course what they argue here. Those arguments work by centering identity while flattening or ignoring power relationships. Here the Facebook VP of engineering said that the ultimate goal is cognitive diversity, and cognitive diversity is correlated with identity diversity. That means it's not just about getting women in tech, it's about broad voices, broad representation. Right? So this is exactly what I would say. The reason why we want a woman or a black person at the table is because they have a different knowledge. It's because they have different thoughts because of their different life experience. They have different thoughts that they can bring in. So actually, by including these, what they call bodies, it is about cognitive diversity even in itself. But the authors here really see this from a different angle. They really see this in terms of power relationships between race and gender groups. And the arguments of the authors don't make sense if you don't view it through that lens. And that lens to me is just such a sad look on the world. And also I think it's a very, very inaccurate look on the world. And it's, I think, a very dangerous look on the world. They say, instead of looking at historical patterns of marginalization, calls for cognitive diversity argue that all differences are equal. No, we're not. No calls for cognitive diversity don't argue that all differences are equal. Well aware that some people have it harder, well aware that some differences are bigger, worse or better. That's absolutely well aware. All they're saying is that race and gender shouldn't be the only things to consider and shouldn't be in itself be considered diverse. Just because someone is of a certain skin color, it doesn't mean anything, right? It doesn't actually tell you anything about that person. So why not consider people as individuals and look at what was their life like until this point and what could they contribute to the discussion we're having, rather than looking at the color of their skin. I mean, if the color of their skin played a role in their life, then obviously that would manifest in my suggestion as well. But to just look at people through this kind of group lens is so foreign to me. And yeah, I feel it's quite dangerous. Yeah, so again, and this could argue that all differences are equal. I mean, the point where you have to start misrepresenting what the counter argument is saying, that's really how you know you're dealing with not a well-intentioned person on the other side of the discussion. This is really politics now. This isn't a well-intended argumentation. It's really someone trying to achieve some goal, because they have to misrepresent the other side, and this only gets worse from here. They say recently was exemplified in the controversy over Google's appointment of Heritage Foundation CEO Kay Coles James to its Advanced Technology External Advisory Council. Google's reasoning for the appointment of James was ostensibly to ensure diversity of thought by including a conservative viewpoint on the council. Alright, so Google has a technology advisory board, a council, of external people, and they've included a conservative. And she is, by all metrics, let's say, a standard conservative. So this is not a far-right neo-Nazi type, I don't know. But this is someone who has similar opinions than half the U.S. country, and at least in the Western world, generally half of the country's population tends to be conservative, more or less. I mean, there's differences, but yeah. So this is an opinion that a large portion of the population shares. So it would be, it would be suitable to include at least someone of that opinion in an external advisory council to have that on board. You don't have to listen to her. Like, it's not like she's made king. It's simply that she will have the opportunity to input her voice, representative of kind of that very large percentage of people. They go on to say, James is also a black woman, thus adding racial and gender diversity to the panel. So even further, right? It's a conservative black woman, right? But the pushback following James's inclusion focused on her policy position, citing specifically her vocal anti-LGBTQ and anti-immigrant views, and highlighted why cognitive diversity is a particularly limited lens. And the pushback here was very much spearheaded by one of the authors of this article. So I this isn't just reporting. I'll also criticize this pushback here, since it's kind of argued for in this article. It's not just reported, and also because the authors are the same. So here they say they have vocal anti-LGBTQ and anti-immigrant views, and I haven't actually gone specifically and looked at what this person particularly has said, but given that she's a standard conservative and has been in public office, I believe under George W. Bush, she can't, I have trouble believing that she has extremely hateful opinions like these people shouldn't exist, or something like that nature. Often people, conservative people, have issues with forcing people to adopt certain pronouns for people, or issues with which bathrooms do people go in, and generally are tougher on immigration, especially illegal immigration and so on. I mean, these are views that people hold, and a large part of people, and these are discussions to be had. So including this person would be a very sensible move. But they say in a letter opposing the appointment, a group of Google workers calling themselves Googlers Against Transphobia and Hate, transphobia and hate, responded to the idea that diversity of thought justified James's addition to the council. This is a weaponization of the language of diversity. By appointing James to the ATEAC, Google elevates and endorses her view, implying that hers is a valid perspective worthy of inclusion in its decision making. This is unacceptable. Here it says again the author was one of the organizers of that. So and that's what they're saying here. The views, if you don't have our views, these are unacceptable views, right? It's a valid perspective worthy of inclusion. It's what they're saying basically is you don't even talk to this person. Like talking to this person, considering their opinion, you can still evaluate the opinion, but even considering their opinion is already wrong. And that given that the person is a black woman. So basically, the author's idea of diversity is people that look different, that are from race and gender groups that don't have much power or perceived what they call power right now, as long as they all think exactly as we think, right? Then that's fine. As long as they share our thoughts, as long as they don't have dissenting opinions. We want the different looking people, but don't dare talk to anyone of a different opinion. This I don't see how. I mean, these authors, in my opinion, they really live in a bubble. They really live in a tiny Silicon Valley or Silicon Valley influenced spaces, because this is half the people. They're basically saying half the people in their greater community, in their country, aren't even worthy listening to. Their opinions aren't even worthy of inclusion, of consideration. So yeah, well done. Might as well discredit them at once. I'm sure that's gonna fly well with these people. All right. Might start calling them deplorables and see what they do. Maybe they'll return the favor and elect a moron just to stick it in your face. I mean, that's what happened. So the idea of cognitive diversity is mobilized by some support that the AI field and the tech industry are already diverse. Going so far as to support claims that not including identities like white and male constitutes discrimination. Yes, it can. Like if you include every single identity except white and male, that constitutes discrimination. Yes. Even if they're in the majority, it still constitutes discrimination. Like, no one can help being born white and male. No one white and male chose to be born like that. You don't choose the melanin content of your skin. You can modulate it a bit by going to the sun, which computer science people statistically don't do very often. So there's not much leeway there. To not include identities like that, if you include every other one, can constitute discrimination. True. A July 2017 memo written by James Damore, a software engineer at Google, is illustrative of such pushback. Titled Google's Ideological Echo Chamber, and published in an internal mailing list, the memo critiqued the company's diversity policies, arguing that biological differences between men and women, rather than bias and discrimination, help explain gender disparities at the company. I feel you can leave out the rather than here. I think the memo simply stated that biological differences can help explain the gender disparities. Damore's objective writing the memo was to make the case that policies designed to achieve equal representation are unfair, divisive, and bad for business. Well, some are, yes, especially the recommendations that you've given at the beginning. Number 7 is unfair, divisive, and I would also argue bad for business, yes. So, supporters for Damore's point of view at times even drew on rhetoric of the pipeline to make the case that diversity initiatives are in fact discriminatory. They argue incorrectly that if there aren't qualified candidates in the pipeline, then hiring those who are unqualified on the basis of identity discriminates against those who are qualified. No, I would say hiring anyone on the basis of identity discriminates. I mean, inherently. So again, I think that's the larger argument that these people are making, which is not incorrect, is very correct. So in an update to the memo, Damore himself asserted that he values diversity and inclusion, but his primary concern was cognitive diversity. He says diversity and inclusion is not denying that sexism exists, doesn't endorse using stereotypes. And in specific, I've read the memo, and it directly says these are population level kind of statistics, and there is more overlap than difference, and you absolutely can't say anything about an individual by looking at these statistics. That's almost a quote from this memo. So he was very much concerned with considering people as individuals, but also if you like he was basically making the same argument as earlier. I told you to remember, hey, look, they described this one study that found that women's interests might be different and we might shape the curriculum. That's basically what Damore said. He said women's interests might be different and we'd have to maybe shape the way we do work, like change the way we do software engineering to attract more of them. That's what was one of his points. So it's exactly the same thing, but of course he's a misogynist because he suggested this could be due partly because of biological differences. And I mean, the way he was dragged through the mud is just crazy. And they shoot here very much against this kind of biological, what they call biological determinism. We'll see this very briefly. They say diversity becomes an empty signifier, stripped of the histories and experiences of systemic discrimination, repurposed around ideology rather than bodies. Yeah, I'd say diversity has nothing inherently to do with bodies, like as such. I think that's only the case if you are already convinced of this, let's say. Within hours of the memo's publication, harassment targeting minority advocates who pushed back against the claims in the memo began, with a particular focus on queer and trans workers. Well, that's bad, but also I think the pushback against people who voiced support was also pretty bad, because one of them was fired, as you already stated. Google's vice president of diversity even locked down her Twitter account shortly after Damore's firing, responding to the barrage of threats describing her as a police Nazi. Well, yeah, if you fire something, I mean, undoubtedly Google fired this guy because they thought it was less of a PR disaster if they also fired him now. Then, I mean, this probably wasn't an ideological decision, much more a PR decision. But if you fire someone after stating something like this, it very much looks like you're firing them because you don't like their ideas and you don't like what they're saying, which people are generally not in favor of censoring freedom of speech. But yeah, that being said, harassment is bad. Don't harass people. Also, that being said, criticism isn't always harassment, and don't conflate the two. Damore's memo also stated that the distribution of preference abilities of men and women differ in part due to biological causes, and that these differences may explain why we don't see equal representation of women in tech and leadership. This assertion hinges on a flawed assumption that identities like gender and race are essential and fixed biological attributes, and that inequalities are at least in part the product of such irreducible differences. Well, I mean, if they're not fixed biological attributes, certainly gender and race have a 0.99 correlation with biology. Right? And since your biology is first and it's determined when you're conceived, that demonstrates a causal direction, right? So even if they're not exactly fixed, they are like overwhelmingly fixed. And to suggest that it is a flawed assumption that these inequalities are at least part product of such differences, what you'd have to do, they simply state it's a flawed assumption. What you have to do in order to show this is a flawed assumption, you have to show that gender and race, as far as they're biologically determined, have no influence whatsoever on these differences. That's what you have to show, right? That's the counterclaim, because the claim is they have, at least in part, something to do with it. And that's also, I believe, what the Moore stated, and what the predominant opinion, like, it's very, like, all the research points to, for example, there is a large difference in interest between genders, as far as, for example, career selection goes, and so on. Now we can talk about why that is, but there's also a large consensus, I believe, that this is at least partly determined, to however a degree, but it is at least partly determined by biology. In order to show that this is flawed, you need to show that it can't have any influence, right? You have to basically prove the impossibility of this having an influence, which no one has done so far, much to the contrary. So to simply state this is a flawed assumption kind of shows to me that they're in a bubble, and they're expecting to speak to people in the same bubble. So they go on and kind of discredit this as called a biological determinism, which I don't think that's a correct use of the term biological determinism, but you can judge for yourself. I think these people are saying that biology might have some influence, and we could adjust for that. It's not even right. It's not even. Yeah, this comes up here. So conclusion. Finally, I think it's been 2 hours. Sorry. Conclusion. Throughout this report, we've outlined the scope and scale of the problem, tracing how the diversity crisis in the industry and the problems of bias in AI systems are interrelated aspects of the same issue. No. In the past, these topics were commonly examined in isolation, but increasing evidence shows that they are closely intertwined. No. You've shown that they're parallel. You have absolutely not shown that they're interrelated aspects of the same issue, and you have not shown that any one of these causally influences the other, that there is any feedback loop. You have not shown that fixing one leads to fixing the other. I mean, you could also take a company that extremely is focused on, or for some reason has a different workforce, and then show how their products with the same data sets as the previous companies don't end up being biased. Probably not so easy. But again, none of that is in the report. There are many things you could actually do to show what you wanted to show, but it's just not the case in this article. Our analysis surfaced two prominent responses to the diversity crisis. On one hand, a worker-driven movement, which we've skipped. On the other hand, we observe a small but vocal counter-movement that actively resists diversity in the industry. I mean, what dishonesty actively resists diversity? I mean, the thought that these people stray around no, I don't like the other looking people. It's just so absurd. All they're saying is that either we don't understand the problem in the correct way, or our tools aren't appropriate to solve the problem. I think everyone has the same goal of the workplace and the AI systems being as fair and as non-discriminatory as possible. Misrepresentation of the other side is something that really bugs me, and it's something that these authors do a lot. So, yeah, I lose my polite side maybe. And uses arguments from biological determinism to assert that women are inherently less suited to computer science and AI. What a load of crap. Sorry, but uses to assert that women are inherently less suited to computer science and AI. No one, okay, not no one, but no one that I know asserts that. Absolutely no one that makes these arguments. Okay, sorry, not no one. You can always find a sexist douchebag that makes that argument, but this is not a serious argument made, and this is not this counter movement most people in the argument that most people in this counter movement make. Not at all. And to represent them as such is just so dishonest that, yeah, this basically, this is the, it's nice that it's in the conclusion, because it finally, like, at the end, it completely destroys the credibility of me taking seriously these authors. I thought they had, so the parts we skipped over, I mostly would say I'm mostly okay with. They mostly show parallels between that AI systems are biased, and they also show that there is unequal representation. They also show examples of discrimination, harassment, and so on, problems in AI companies and universities. That all, you can read the report for this. It's pretty interesting to read. But the points I've addressed, I'm not happy with. Yeah, so that was it for now. Sorry this took so long, but I felt a thorough take was necessary. Have a nice rest of the day.